That was Splendor boat captain Dennis Davern revealing the explosive moment Natalie Wood's final night alive took a devastating turn. But what happened in the hours after her husband Robert Wagner smashed a wine bottle?
The water off Catalina Island hides Hollywood's darkest secret. But the ocean isn't the only thing that's been quiet. The captain of the yacht has carried a burden for decades, but now he breaks the silence.
Natalie Wood's mysterious death. Time is running out to confirm what really happened to the beloved actress on this luxury yacht. We know that the night of November 28, 1981 started with Natalie Wood and 3 others on this boat.
He claims he saw something on the deck before Natalie fell, a detail that changes the accident to a crime. But why speak now, you may ask? Because he can't take the secret to his grave. The last night on the Splendor. November 29, 1981, started with a promise for Natalie Wood.
Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken left the island in a police helicopter, leaving Davern the grim task of identifying Natalie Wood's body.
Robert Wagner asked me if I would identify her body.
She had finally returned to the movie industry after a long hiatus, poised to reclaim her throne as Hollywood's darling in the multi-million-dollar sci-fi thriller Brainstorm. It was supposed to be her grand renaissance, a dazzling second act for the woman who had captivated audiences since childhood. Seeking a break from the grueling production schedule and the blinding studio lights, she went on a yacht cruise to unwind off the coast of Catalina Island. The vessel was the Splendor, a name that hinted at luxury but would soon become synonymous with mystery. On board were her husband, Robert Wagner, her co-star Christopher Walken, and the captain, Dennis Davern. What began as a Thanksgiving weekend escape quickly dissolved into a volatile cocktail of jealousy, alcohol, and rising tempers. The Pacific Ocean, usually a glistening backdrop for the elite, turned into an inky, churning void as night fell. Little did Natalie know that day would be her last. The trip started on Saturday, November 28, 1981. The group kicked off with a veneer of Hollywood glamour as the Splendor cut a path from Avalon to Isthmus Cove, the Pacific breeze whipping through the air deceptively. On board, the chemistry was volatile, a mix of industry titans trying to unwind under the Catalina sun. As day bled into night, the group took the party ashore to Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant, where things suddenly took a turn from relaxation to reckless indulgence. Dinner quickly degenerated from a formal affair to a drunken spree fueled by bottle after bottle of champagne, the laughter growing too loud and the behavior too erratic. It got so wild that the restaurant manager, sensing the brewing storm in the eyes of his famous patrons, quietly tipped off the harbor master to keep a close watch on them, a foreboding warning that would soon spark one of the greatest Hollywood mysteries. The party stumbled back to the Splendor aboard their dinghy after 10 p.m., but the change of scenery did nothing to cool the rising temperatures. Back on the deck of the yacht, the tension that had been simmering all evening finally boiled over into an explosive confrontation between Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken. The tension was thick as an argument over Natalie's dedication to her career versus her family ensued. The argument escalated into a cocktail of rage and jealousy, and in a moment of pure fury, Wagner reportedly smashed a wine bottle, warning Walken to mind his own business. Sickened by the fighting, Natalie turned her back on the chaos and retreated to her stateroom. It was reported that Wayne followed Natalie to the room, and a fresh bout of argument started between the couple. Marilyn Wayne, a woman who came forward with details about what happened that night in 2011, claimed that she heard the alleged fight occur. Around 11 p.m., the silence of the cove was shattered by a chilling sound that drifted over the water to a nearby boat. Wayne claimed she heard a woman's voice screaming in terror. "Help me! Someone! Please, help me! I'm drowning!" The desperate pleas rang out repeatedly, piercing the darkness for 15 agonizing minutes, only to be met by a man's slurred, casual response. "Oh, hold on, we're coming to get you." Then the screaming stopped, and the heavy silence of the ocean returned, swallowing the cries as if they had never happened. Wayne claimed that she was panicked, so she called the harbor patrol, but there was no response. By midnight, the quiet on the Splendor turned into cold panic when Wagner went to say goodnight and found an empty room. Natalie was gone. Confused and desperate, Wagner and Captain Davern scrambled to make sense of the void she left behind, finally making a frantic ship-to-shore call at 1:30 a.m. to report her missing. As the clock ticked toward 3:30 a.m., the U.S. Coast Guard was formally alerted, transforming the calm waters into a frenzied search zone with spotlights cutting through the ink-black night, hunting for the missing star. At 5:30 a.m., the search teams found their first ominous clue: the inflatable dinghy, the Prince Valiant, drifting aimlessly in an isolated cove a mile from the yacht. It was a ghost ship. The engine was off, the gear was in neutral, and the oars were locked in place, proving it hadn't been driven, but had simply floated away. The dread culminated at 8 a.m. when the sun illuminated the tragic reality. Natalie Wood's body was found floating face down in the water. She was clad in a nightgown, blue socks, and a heavy red down jacket that had pulled her into the depths. The autopsy would later reveal a 0.14% blood alcohol level and mysterious bruises on her arms, legs, and cheek, injuries sustained before she hit the water, leaving the world with a sensational, heartbreaking mystery. Natalie's death became the tragic fulfillment of a grim prophecy that shaped the narrative of her life. And to understand it, we have to go back to where it all began. Hollywood's brightest star with a dark fear. Natalie Wood wasn't just a movie star, she was the crown jewel of an industry built on illusion. From the innocent charm of Miracle on 34th Street to the simmering rebellion of Rebel Without a Cause and the iconic tragedy of West Side Story, she had navigated the tricky transition from child prodigy to screen legend with a grace that seemed superhuman. To the world, she was the girl who had it all: beauty, talent, and a magnetism that could command millions. But beneath the glamour and grace lay a fragility that she guarded fiercely, a private terror that stood in stark contrast to her fearless on-screen persona. While she could weep on cue and summon raw emotion for the camera, Natalie harbored a paralyzed, primal fear that no director could cut away: the water. It wasn't just a dislike, it was a phobia etched into her DNA, fueled by a grim prophecy and solidified by a terrifying accident on a movie set as a child that left her with a permanently weakened wrist. The extent of her phobia was witnessed firsthand on the set of Splendor in the Grass, when Natalie was to wade through a pond. The thought of the water terrified her so much that the director assured her that the scene would be shot once, but the assurance did little to quell her nerves. It was not until years later that Natalie's sister, Lana, cleared the air as to the origins of her phobia. Natalie's mother had received a prophecy that she would give birth to a famous child who would be snatched away by dark waters. Friends and family knew the truth. Natalie was petrified of dark water. She refused to go into the ocean at night, often stating that her greatest nightmare was being alone in the deep. She was a woman who preferred the safety of the shore, the solidity of the ground beneath her feet, and the controlled environment of a soundstage. This paralyzing phobia is precisely what makes the official narrative of that November night so impossible for those who knew her to swallow. The story that she simply slipped while trying to secure a banging dinghy in the middle of a pitch-black ocean contradicts every instinct she possessed. Why would a woman who was terrified of the water step out alone into the rain-slicked darkness to secure a boat she feared? Why would she leave the safety of the cabin to confront the very thing that haunted her nightmares? The image of Natalie Wood voluntarily engaging with the dark, churning sea alone doesn't just feel wrong. It feels like a character-breaking script, a plot hole so gaping that it suggests the ending wasn't an accident, but a scene forced upon her against her will. The captain's first hints of doubt. On November 30th, the LA County coroner, Thomas Noguchi, slapped a label on the tragedy: accidental drowning, case closed. He waved off the bruises on Natalie's body as superficial, likely just bumps from falling into the water, and pointed to scratch marks on the Prince Valiant dinghy as proof she tried desperately to climb back in before the cold ocean took her. It was a neat, tidy conclusion for a messy, chaotic night. But for anyone paying attention, the official story was full of holes. Even Noguchi later admitted in his own book that things didn't add up. Why would Natalie, a woman paralyzed by a fear of dark water, head out to the pitch-black ocean alone? Where was she planning to go in her nightgown? And the biggest question of all, why did the men on the boat wait so long to realize she was gone? Natalie's sister, Lana, wasn't buying it either. She knew Natalie wouldn't go near that dinghy in the dark, let alone try to untie it solo. Then there was Robert Wagner's shifting story. First, he tells the cops they had a fight about her time away from the family. Later, he spins a different yarn in his book, claiming he and Walken were just having a boring political debate, and Natalie got fed up and went to bed. He suggested that maybe she slipped while trying to stop the dinghy from banging against the hull. But that banging dinghy theory felt convenient. Too convenient. And right in the middle of this swirling mess was Captain Davern. Officially, he was towing the line, backing up Wagner's story. But off the record, the guy was a nervous wreck. He started dropping hints that didn't match the police report at all. He wasn't spilling the whole truth yet, but he was radiating fear. He'd make weird comments about the timeline, hinting that the search didn't happen the way they said it did. He acted like a man who had seen something that terrified him, something that turned a tragic accident into a haunting secret. He kept looking over his shoulder, suggesting that the silence on the boat that night wasn't peaceful, it was forced. What exactly did he hear before the splashing stopped? He wasn't saying yet, but his eyes told a story the police report left out. The cracks in the official investigation mirrored the fractures in a love story so volatile and magnetic that Hollywood's golden couple didn't just marry once. They had to walk down the aisle twice just to try and survive it. A marriage under pressure. To the public, Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner were the ultimate fairy tale, a Ken and Barbie dream team that radiated glamour and old-school romance. But behind the closed doors of their Beverly Hills mansion, the script was far grittier. Their first marriage in 1957 crumbled under the weight of career envy and infidelity rumors, famously ending in a bitter divorce. When they remarried in 1972, it was supposed to be the triumphant sequel, a testament to a love that could weather any storm. But by November 1981, the storm was already raging inside the cabin of the Splendor. The weekend trip to Catalina wasn't a honeymoon, it was a pressure cooker. The air was thick with unspoken resentments. Natalie was back in the spotlight, filming Brainstorm and shining brighter than ever, while Wagner was feeling the sting of being left on the sidelines. Add Christopher Walken, Natalie's intense, brooding co-star, into the mix, and you had the perfect recipe for disaster. As the champagne flowed at dinner, so did the venom. Witnesses at the restaurant saw the golden couple unraveling in real time, their hushed bickering turning into slurred, angry jabs that made everyone within earshot uncomfortable. By the time they stumbled back onto the yacht, the political debate Wagner later claimed they were having had morphed into a full-blown ugly confrontation. The alcohol had stripped away the polite veneer, leaving only raw jealousy and rage. Davern, trapped in the crossfire, watched as the two men squared off in the salon. Wagner turned on Walken, accusing him of wanting to sleep with his wife, before turning his fury on Natalie, smashing a wine bottle on the table in a terrifying explosion of glass and temper. He screamed at her to get off his boat. Natalie fled to her room to escape the toxicity, but the nightmare was far from over. Davern later claimed that the fighting didn't stop when she closed the door. He stood paralyzed on the bridge, listening, as the shouting match followed her, moving from the salon out onto the dark, slippery rear deck. And then, amidst the wind and the waves, the captain heard a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It wasn't the sound of water, it was something worse. The missing moment. Two versions of the truth. The most terrifying part of that night isn't just what happened, but the fact that the script has two completely different endings, and neither one has a final scene. To this day, the exact moment Natalie Wood slipped into the dark water remains a black hole. No one admits to seeing her fall. Instead, we are left with a war of words between the two men who were supposed to protect her. Her husband, Robert Wagner, and the captain, Dennis Davern. In Wagner's version, the one he wrote in his memoir Pieces of My Heart, the night is tragic, but ultimately an accident. He admits to the fight, sure, He says he and Christopher Walken got into a heated argument in the main cabin, leading him to smash a wine bottle in frustration. But in this retelling, Natalie was already gone, tucked away in the master cabin, safe from the noise. He claims when he finally went to check on her, the room was empty and the dinghy was missing. His theory? It's the banging dinghy defense. He believes Natalie, unable to sleep because of the boat knocking against the hull, went out in her nightgown to retie it. He thinks she slipped on the slick swim step, hit her head, and rolled into the water. It's a sad story of a clumsy misstep in the dark, a simple, heartbreaking accident where no one is to blame. But Captain Davern tells a story that sounds less like a tragedy and more like a crime scene. For years, he kept his mouth shut. But when the case was reopened in 2011, he flipped the script. Davern claims the fight didn't end in the cabin. He says the screaming match between Wagner and Wood spilled out onto the rear deck, right near the water. He remembers the voices rising, the rage boiling over, and hearing Wagner scream at Natalie to get off his boat. Davern's most damning accusation isn't just about the fight, it's about the silence that followed. He alleges that after Natalie went missing, Wagner didn't panic. He stalled. Davern claims Wagner deliberately delayed calling the Coast Guard for hours and told him not to turn on the searchlights. Why leave the woman you love in the dark ocean if you think it's just an accident? And then there are the clues that don't care about anyone's story. Witnesses on a nearby boat heard a woman screaming for her life around midnight, followed by a man's mocking voice, "Okay, oh honey, we'll get you." And finally, the body itself spoke. The original autopsy said accidental, but in 2012, that changed to drowning and other undetermined factors. Why? Because the bruises on Natalie's arms and legs didn't look like they came from a fall. They looked like they happened before she hit the water. It was enough to name Robert Wagner a person of interest in 2018, leaving the world to wonder if the banging against the boat wasn't a dinghy, but a struggle for survival. The search, the silence, the discovery. While the Splendor sat bobbing in the dark water, a strange and terrifying silence took hold. You'd expect panic, screaming, engines roaring to life the second Natalie was noticed missing. But instead, the clock just kept ticking. Captain Davern and Robert Wagner poked around the immediate area, but the timeline tells a story of hesitation that still doesn't sit right. It wasn't until 1:30 a.m., hours after the shouting stopped, that Wagner finally radioed the harbor patrol. The worst part is that the Coastal Guard didn't get the official call until 3:30 a.m. That's more than 3 hours of dead air. 3 hours where Hollywood's biggest star was alone in the freezing Pacific, and the people who were supposed to save her were waiting. When the search finally kicked into high gear, the ocean gave up its secrets slowly. At 5:30 a.m., a search helicopter spotted the Prince Valiant dinghy. It was washed up in a lonely cove, looking like a ghost ship. But the real heartbreak came at 7:44 a.m. when a rescue boat captain spotted a flash of red in the gray water about a mile from the yacht. It was Natalie. She was floating face down, weighed down by a heavy down jacket, a flannel nightgown, and wool socks, heavy, waterlogged clothes that made swimming impossible. The medical examiners were quick to call it an accidental drowning, pinning it on the booze, she was legally drunk, and a tragic slip. But the body told a different, darker story that wouldn't stay buried. The autopsy revealed fresh bruises on her arms, a scratch on her neck, and a scrape on her cheek. Years later, when the case was reopened in 2011, those marks became the center of a firestorm. Investigators admitted those injuries likely happened before she hit the water, hinting at a struggle, not a slip. The cause of death was changed from accident to drowning and other undetermined factors. The official reports filed that morning painted a picture of a tragic mishap, a drunken fall in the night. But Captain Davern remembers the silence differently. He remembers the waiting, the stalling, and the eerie calm of a husband who wasn't rushing to turn on the searchlights. While the police wrote down accident, Davern was left with the haunting memory of a delay that might have cost Natalie her life, wondering if the time spent waiting was just hesitation or a head start. The Captain Break. For 30 agonizing years, Captain Dennis Davern served as the keeper of Hollywood's darkest secret, a man living in the suffocating shadow of a lie he told to protect a legend. But silence has a way of rotting a soul, and eventually, the crushing weight of that November night became too heavy for one man to carry alone. It wasn't just guilt that finally broke him. It was the gnawing, desperate need for justice that had been denied for decades. After years of feeling dismissed by the legal system, ignored by the press, and effectively held hostage by a narrative he knew was false, Davern stepped out from the background to blow the lid off the story he had helped construct. In a move that shocked the industry, he admitted to the world that he had lied to the police in 1981, peeling back the layers of the official story to reveal the ugly truth he had hidden underneath. His new account transforms the tragedy from a clumsy accident into a potential crime scene. Davern claims the argument that night wasn't just a drunk couple bickering over career choices. It was a violent, physical explosion that shook the boat. He described hearing terrifying, crashing sounds coming from the stateroom, the unmistakable noise of bodies hitting walls and furniture breaking, sounds of a desperate struggle that went far beyond a verbal spat. When the noise finally stopped and he rushed to the back deck, he didn't find a confused husband wondering where his wife went. He claims he found Robert Wagner alone, sweaty, flushed, anxious, and looking like a man who had just done something he couldn't undo, standing near the spot where his wife had vanished into the black water. According to Davern, the cover-up began the second the silence fell. He alleges that a frantic Wagner ordered him not to turn on the searchlights and to delay calling for help, explicitly worried more about bad press than saving his wife. Davern describes the days and weeks that followed as a psychological prison. He claims he was hidden away at the Wagner estate, surrounded by bodyguards and lawyers who coached him to keep his mouth shut and paid for his therapy to manage the trauma. It was a golden cage designed to ensure his silence. When finally asked the question that had hung in the air for decades, is Robert Wagner responsible for her death? The captain didn't hesitate or stutter. His answer was a chilling, simple, yes. Publicity stunt, the legal circus. When the LA Sheriff's Department reopened the files of Natalie Wood's case 30 years later, the world gasped, but the legal experts just rolled their eyes. While the tabloids screamed murder, the experts in the trenches saw something far less dramatic. A cold case going nowhere fast. Laurie Levinson, a heavy-hitter prosecutor turned professor, didn't mince words, calling the renewed frenzy silliness and putting the odds of criminal charges at 0 to nothing. For the pros, the idea that a witness could pop up 3 decades later with a real story and land a conviction wasn't just unlikely. It was a fantasy. The real enemy here was time. The statute of limitations on everything but murder has expired. We're talking about a deadline that passed while Ronald Reagan was still sitting in the Oval Office. Unless it was cold-blooded murder, the window for justice had long since slammed shut. Unless they find a smoking gun, like DNA on a decomposed body or a confession, they don't have a case. And their star witness, Captain Davern, is what defense attorneys call lunch. He's a guy who admitted to lying to the cops, admitted to being drunk on the night in question, and has a book to sell. Wagner's camp wasted no time painting him as a cash-hungry opportunist looking to profit off the anniversary of a tragedy. Davern's team fired back, swearing he just wants justice. But in a court of law, a witness who changes his testimony after 30 years is a defense lawyer's dream. So if charges are impossible, why bother reopening it? That's where the story took a really dark turn. Some people think it was a PR stunt. Some insiders suggest the whole investigation smells like a perfectly timed distraction. At the time, the Sheriff's Department was dealing with a massive corruption scandal. Reopening the Natalie Wood case was a perfect way to distract the media. The police denied it, of course, but the timing was suspicious. At the end of the day, the sensational headlines hit a brick wall of legal reality. Even if Davern is telling the truth and Wagner did delay the search, that's likely manslaughter, not murder. To get a murder charge, you need proof that someone struck the blow or held her down, not just evidence of a bad husband or a cowardly delay. Without that smoking gun, the new inquiry looks less like a path to justice and more like a ghost hunt, chasing shadows that vanished into the dark water long ago. A case reopened and a legacy unsettled. After 3 decades of silence, the mystery of Natalie Wood's death took a new turn. The LA coroner changed the label accident from Natalie's death certificate and replaced it with a chilling new conclusion: drowning and other undetermined factors. It wasn't a guilty verdict, But it was a massive legal admission that the old story of a clumsy fall just didn't add up anymore. This change validated the dark rumors that had swirled for years. The law was finally admitting that the injuries found on her body looked less like mishaps from a tumble and more like marks from a struggle. Suddenly, the official record wasn't contradicting the captain's story of a violent brawl. It was starting to back it up. Now, the case sits in a haunting limbo. It remains an open wound, acknowledged as suspicious, yet unsolved. The puzzle pieces are all there, but the final connection is missing. Natalie Wood's death has become more than just a tragedy. It is Hollywood's eternal ghost story, a mystery where the sea washed away the proof, leaving us with a legend that refuses to rest in peace. The final curtain. A question remains. As the curtain falls on this tragedy, one agonizing question hangs in the air, louder than the waves crashing against the hull of the Splendor. It isn't about the smashed bottle or the bruised arms. It is about the silence. The most damning detail in Captain Davern's confession isn't what he heard, but what he was told not to do. If the love of your life vanished into the pitch-black ocean, wouldn't you burn down the world to find her? Wouldn't you flood the water with every searchlight you had? Davern's account leaves us staring at a terrifying possibility. That while Natalie Wood was fighting for her life in the freezing dark, the decision on the boat was to prioritize reputation over rescue. Was the delay a drunken, paralyzed hesitation, or was it a calculated choice to let the clock run out? The answer to that question lies buried in the deep, locked away in the conscience of the only man left standing. We may never get a verdict. The ocean is a keeper of secrets, and it refuses to give this one up. But we cannot let the darkness of her death eclipse the brilliance of her life. Natalie Wood was not just a body pulled from the water. She was the girl who taught a cynical world to believe in miracles on 34th Street, the restless soul of Rebel Without a Cause, and the heart of West Side Story. She was a mother, a legend, and a force of nature who lived her life in the light. The mystery of her final hour will always haunt us, but her legacy remains untouched, a star that even the darkest water could never truly extinguish. If the fear of dark water defined her entire life, ask yourself this: what could have possibly terrified her enough to make her choose the freezing ocean over the safety of her own husband? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. To enjoy more content like this, click on the next video on your screen.